The first was, I was thinking that I could come in. My background prior to this was marketing technology, so it was a lot of data-driven, automated customer management systems. So I thought we could instantly infuse this company with a turnkey solution that would drive retention, revenue per customer, and also retention of our labor force, right? And so we came in. We did make relatively significant investments up front on that, and quickly learned that the adoption rate of the industry. So, previously I think I referenced landscaping as a mature industry, and really it's more so than mature. It's a little bit archaic, right? And as such, different than mature, it's just operates in a way that is far less technology reliant. And so even our customer base, property managers across the board, were somewhat resistant to building the muscle memory to interact with what would ultimately simplify their lives, our reporting relationship, the level of certainty they have in their budgets and their forecasting, everything. And so we had to take this relatively sizable investment and put it on a back burner, because the other strategy was to create automation throughout the workforce. And when folks aren't showing up to work or you have a high levels of turnover, which I definitely knew about, but didn't really anticipate it would be as disruptive as it was to the day-to-day. So talk about kind of the tyranny of the urgent and urgency over importance.
Hey everyone, I'm Palmer Higgins and welcome to the Big Time Small Business Podcast. I interview owners, operators, and founders of the small businesses you see every day but don't hear enough about. We talk about the obstacles they have faced, the successes they have earned, and where their business is going to inspire and inform you in your own career. On this episode, I talked to Paul Stringer, owner of DHM Landscaping, a commercial maintenance landscaping company in Phoenix, Arizona. Paul purchased DHM almost 3 years ago with the idea of putting his tech and marketing experience to work in a company of his own. His focus on delighting the customer with technology and service far above what is considered normal in the industry has propelled DHM to grow upwards of 45% per year. Paul admits that those rates are unsustainable indefinitely, but remains committed to investing in his team and in technology to stay ahead of the competition. All right, so Paul Stringer, thanks a lot for being on the Big Time Small Business Podcast.
Good to see you, Palmer. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've known each other for a long time now. Coast-to-coast relationship here. Both of us with experience. Me, myself, tangentially, you a little bit less so in the landscaping space. You're the owner of DHM, but got into it really via the entrepreneurship through acquisition angle, which is something that myself and Chen Mark obviously are very familiar with. Sure. So let's go back then and say sort of what got you into landscaping, but really what got you into the concept of entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is, I think, for most people listening, probably pretty new.
So I had been through, in my former life, I was an entrepreneur. I had a marketing firm when I was in my 20s that I sold, and then I went through a couple of other acquisitions in spin-off firms that I had. And the most compelling part of that entire experience for me was that acquisition process and everything that followed. And it occurred to me that there was a tremendous opportunity to enter into an industry and create disruption using a lot of the skills that I had learned in marketing and technology and so forth through acquisition, and kind of speed up the timeline. And this was the idea, right? That I would speed up the timeline, dive right into an existing firm, and be able to start plugging in all these innovative and disruptive inputs and skyrocket the business, 3, 4, 5-fold.
Sure.
And so that was the theory. And I also had been tracking the search fund trend and knowing that there are ripe industries out there, highly fragmented, with a lot of potential deals. And so, landscaping was something that always appealed to me because I had some experience working with True Green tangentially, and was exposed to their operating model. And I moved out to Phoenix and quickly realized that there is no snow, that we have grass year round, and I'm surrounded by these tiny firms that are servicing, every property. Meanwhile, we're building like mad in Arizona. So it was only a matter of time before I started really looking into that space, and I found DHM. And so I was looking at other industries as well. So at that point, it was really a matter of, landscape was my front runner, but it was really a matter of the quality and the caliber of the opportunity that I found, the company, right, the acquisition. Mm-hmm. And so DHM had what I felt and what it has turned out to be true, a tremendous client base of good, solid corporate commercial clients, commercial property management companies and developers that had been with DHM since 2010, and I made the acquisition in late 2015. So 2016 was really our first full year of operation. And so that was really what brought me to this industry and what brought me to DHM itself. And what unfolded is pretty different from what the vision held.
We'll get there. Get there.
But that was that's where I dove in,
sure.
Boots and all.
Yeah. So I want to, because I get this question asked a lot. I want to hear the 2 or 3 things about DHM or about landscaping in general, or the type of landscaping company that DHM is that drew you into this space. Because I get this question a lot is, me, James, and Trish, we searched for a small business to acquire, and we bought a landscaping company. And a lot of people looked at us the day after we did that and said, "You guys are crazy. Why are you guys buying a landscaping company? You guys going to cut grass now? Like, I don't get it." So what was it? What was it for you? I know I have my reasons, and I'll share them, but I want to hear yours first.
Okay, so I want to assure you that I have received the exact same response and question from folks.
Yeah,
and it's actually nice to be able to give you my answers, and I'm curious to hear yours. So, first and foremost, it was an industry that met certain guidelines. I saw an industry that was, we talked previously about a net promoter score, right? So the general satisfaction of customers in the industry was low. And I could not accept that in today's day and age, there could be an industry out there with such low customer service satisfaction scores. So I knew immediately that there was an opportunity to make instant improvements just by pulling a few simple levers, really. Then I also knew that there would most likely be a larger set of options for potential acquisitions, just because of the sheer number of these companies that I felt, for the most part, kept their heads down, did their work, and so that was something that drew me to it. When I found DHM, what I realized is that about 80 to 85% of the revenue is reoccurring, and that for me was it de-risked what I already knew was a highly risky investment for me. I'd never run a landscape company before. I felt like it was easy enough to understand, but still there was a lot of unknowns. And knowing that there was relatively contracted customers, there's an out clause, but every contract is for a year, and 85% of my revenue is tied to those contracts. That made me feel good. And then finally, the relative simplicity of the industry. And this is not to offend the industry itself, because as you get into it, it's highly complex and with multiple layers. But at its essence, it was an industry that, we provide a simple service that everybody needs. And there was a large commercial component, which meant there was a relatively trustworthy customer base out there. And finally, I'm bilingual Spanish-English, and I've worked a lot with the community that we pull from to source labor. And I felt that would be an additional benefit, but it certainly wasn't a driving decision.
Sure. So basically the exact same reasons for us.
Oh, wow.
I generally answer it with slightly different words, but the recurring revenue, number one, contracted revenue for our companies. We're in the snow belt, so I'm a little jealous that you get to deal with sort of just landscaping all year round.
Come on out.
Yeah, tell me about it. Competition is actually a lot higher out here, so we can get into the geographic dispersion. I think a lot of people caught on to the easier to manage a business that is essentially one season. I mean, we're sitting outside right now, and it's February, and it's probably 55 degrees, and you're freezing, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. It was negative 15 when I left Portland, Maine. But recurring contracted revenue with large commercial accounts in an industry that we had great confidence that was going to be around for decades to come, which is a huge component of our investment criteria. The way you put it of low customer satisfaction, I just said the threshold, the bar was set so low that there's tremendous opportunity to whether please the customer or operate a little bit more innovatively, leverage technology a little bit better. There was a bar. The bar was low to do interesting things. And then lastly, the fragmentation of the industry meant that there was opportunities, but also the fact that it's a service business meant that we could find a company that fit our size criteria, which is a small business, but could be the dominant largest player in their local market. And you had high visibility in seeing competitors coming because they had to come from the edges of your service territory. Sure. Someone from Minneapolis, Minnesota couldn't all of a sudden start selling contracts to, the hospital that's down the street from my lay down yard. So you put all that together, and it had the bones of a really good industry. And obviously we've doubled and tripled and quadrupled down in the space. So we still like it.
Oh, that's certainly good for me to hear. And we were different. We certainly didn't have the resources to come in and acquire a firm that was seen as one of the larger firms. And what we can talk about eventually is
you also operate in a geography where the scale of that dominant player is much bigger than it is in northern New England.
Precisely. Yeah, exactly.
So that's where I get to the geographic dispersion of where we are now, and I'd say sort of the southwest and west in general, and now the southeast to some extent is an area of high consolidation with much larger private equity groups or much larger strategic acquirers. And so I would argue that you're in a geography that is more competitive than northern New England.
Yeah.
Agree? Disagree?
I do agree. I'm not as familiar with your market territory, but just think about that.
No one likes dealing with snow. I think that's what it is. People are like, get me out of the snow belt.
And precisely, in fact, our president, CEO, who operates the firm on a day-to-day basis, I'm the owner and I'm highly involved. He had a successful company in Ohio, but got sick of the snow, and he had a clever contract strategy with his customers, mainly big hospitals out there. But even with that in place, a lot of uncertainty on weather patterns, and packed up. Sold off his firm and came out here, and we were very fortunate to get him at DHM. So
yep. So I want to pick up on what you alluded to earlier. Is you had this expectation of this 5-6 year plan of all rainbows and butterflies, everything's going to be great. So let's talk about perception versus reality. Now that you're call it 2.5-3 years in, sort of what have been the biggest surprises, both positive and negative?
So from a positive perspective, I think the intuition that providing better service, however that's ultimately manifested itself, would drastically improve any firm in the industry out here. So we were able to successfully implement a service plan, customer service plan and strategy that I can credit for the majority of the growth and the retention that DHM has experienced. So that has been very rewarding. However, the way that it's come to fruition, it was probably different than what the initial strategy is. So kind of taking off based on answering your question based on, expectations going in and specific strategies that I was going to employ. Mm-hmm. The first was, I was thinking that I could come in. My background prior to this was marketing technology, so it was a lot of data-driven, automated customer management systems. Mm-hmm. So I thought we could instantly infuse this company with a turnkey solution that would drive retention, revenue per customer, and also retention of our labor force, right? And so we came in. We did make relatively significant investments up front on that, and quickly learned that the adoption rate of the industry. So, previously I think I referenced landscaping as a mature industry, and really it's more so than mature, it's a little bit archaic, right? And as such, different than mature, it's just operates in a way that is far less technology reliant. And so even our customer base, property managers across the board, were somewhat resistant to building the muscle memory to interact with what would ultimately simplify their lives, our reporting relationship, the level of certainty they have in their budgets and their forecasting, everything. And so we had to take this relatively sizable investment and put it on a back burner, because the other strategy was to create automation throughout the workforce. And when folks aren't showing up to work or you have a high levels of turnover, which I definitely knew about, but didn't really anticipate it would be as disruptive as it was to the day-to-day.
Yeah. The no-call, no-show is brutal.
The no-call, no-show
logistics.
And it was a real problem for us. So talk about kind of the tyranny of the urgent and urgency over importance. We really had to put out fires for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And those fires, and nothing that was going to threaten the very existence of the firm, but rather, how are we going to sell this absolutely ideal landscaping experience if we can't get our guys to show up on time, or show up and let us know, and if we also can't execute at the quality levels that we need to. So I really had to, as an owner, dive into the bowels of this company and personally ensure that we were putting the quality controls in place at every level of the organization. Yep. So I would say those are two examples.
But you've still been very aggressive in trying to leverage technology. So it's not something that you came in and said, all right, well, I can't automate away everything. I can't make this into sort of a SaaS-like service. But so you took that blow, but you didn't abandon it entirely. We're sitting here outside of an ERP software conference exactly. for landscaping companies. That's why we're both here. We're in it. You're implementing it. Mm-hmm. So how have you evolved to still leverage technology to provide a better customer experience and to provide more certainty in your logistics and ideally higher profit margins, while sort of initially being faced with the dilemma of not being able to do all of what you want to do up front?
Yeah. So initially we wanted to throw everything into the central control system and just hang everything off of it. Right.
Which means what?
Which means, we had a central stack essentially that would hold all of our data for all of our customers, and it would integrate budgets, quality reports, as well as service calls. It would send notifications through a customized dashboard that lives on the laptop or desktop of our several customers throughout the valley, that would notify them of approvals that needed to be made. At the touch of a button, they would be able to approve work orders. It would also allow folks from the field to send photos as proof of performance in real time to customers. It also had everything operationally where I believed, and we know for a fact that the lack of trust in the industry exists. How do I know you're actually doing your job? To really fill that gap. At the same time, an extensive budget management system on the back end that allowed us to do, job costing and run extensive reports. Now, all of this was too much of an undertaking, although the vision was laid out and many hours were put against it. And so what we did was we chose what we thought would have the highest impact, and we implemented off-the-shelf solutions for those, right? So we worked with a company to customize a field reporting app that allowed our managers to conduct inspection reports on a regular basis, and they would automatically be sent to a series of folks to inspect and then off to customers, which created a significant amount of customer satisfaction. Time and again, we never see anything like this. If I pay $250 to change out a valve, I never know if it's done because I don't get any pictures to prove it. And something as simple as that we decided to solve, and we did successfully. We also we changed our PO system to, as part of that same custom platform, to have POs kind of live within this, so we could have POs generated or estimates generated from the field, instantly approved by managers and then off to customers. The only thing that we weren't able to implement was the reminder, an alert that we envisioned being kind of dinging, reminding them on a daily basis until they approved it. But nevertheless, it has driven revenue per customer, because that's essentially how we're measuring success. So those are two. It's very much front end. Whereas a lot of we had to go custom because a lot of the solutions that are out there are very back end oriented, and we were small enough, and I had enough involvement in the financials that I was able to handle that on my own, and that's what a lot of the solutions off the shelf offered. So we had to anything that was interacting and engaging with customers, and we talked to everyone from Salesforce all the way down to the folks that we ended up using to come up with that solution. It was very hard to find turnkey customer interfaces that would directly affect the strategic advantage we were trying to achieve.
Sure. And now you're obviously in version 2.0 as you start to roll on this software system, Spire. It is landscape specific. We use it in our landscaping companies. Not a full ERP system because it doesn't have a general ledger, but will manage everything from customer relationship management through the gross profit line, including mobile time tracking. Probably not with all the bells and whistles that you want, but sort of what made you essentially remake the technology stack and reinvent yourself again in a 2-year time frame. Because that's implementation, onboarding is what everyone talks about. It's like the worst part of software, and you're doing it now twice in 2 years.
Yeah, well, and that's certainly what we're learning, and we hope to see them implemented here in the next 6 months. And DHM is, and I don't want to skip ahead, but with regards to the technology, we definitely think we've matured to the point where we could take it on, and the necessary bodies that we need to allocate to customers to get them on board and using it, as well as ensuring proper integration across the ranks of the company, are now in place. Yep. So
let's talk. So you spent a lot of time focusing on the front end, the customer experience. I think that makes sense because happy customers are obviously the leading indicator of a successful business. You can't. No matter how well you operate, if you don't have happy customers, they're not going to be around for that long.
Sure.
But as you point out, one of the challenges of running a landscaping business is it's a service business where you have to manage mobile crews all over the place, routing, efficiency, budget versus actual hours, productivity, use of materials. So how have you managed, and I'll call it the back end, but it's not really the back end of a technology stack. It's the back end of the operation of the business, the people side. How have you managed it? What lessons have you learned along the way to try and marry that up with the high expectations, the high service that you're giving on the front end?
Yeah. So, and I obviously mentioned this immediately as one of the hard lessons that we had to learn. And, at the end of the day, we've done a lot, and I'll walk through some of the things that we've done to ensure a quality product behind the quality packaging. But for us, it's come down to investing in quality people, and obviously there's a huge constraint when it comes to talent and the labor force. But nevertheless, that has been our strategy. So, the original folks of all the folks that were part of DHM when we acquired it, none of them are left.
Wow.
Yeah. And we had, I think maybe we've had one who's returned. But what we've done at a high level, which has really permeated and helped, is we've created this culture of accountability. And it is a culture that we've learned as management that if you don't truly subscribe to it and commit yourself to it, then it won't be believed and followed by everyone else in the firm. Which means that if you find someone who doesn't live up to certain standards that are set, then they're asked to leave the company. So we've had to, unfortunately, move away from a lot of folks due to that, but it has resulted in a much more quality team that we have today. So
how scary is that process? So it's something that's been talked about on this podcast a few times of, if it's not the right, if you're not a culture fit, and if accountability is a big part of your culture, it doesn't matter how productive they are. They're not going to be a good fit, but it's hard to let go of those people.
It certainly is. So, we certainly do give folks every opportunity to kind of get on board. But it's very scary because you don't know, sometimes it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And we've time and again had to believe that the devil we don't know would be better than just because simple enough, we committed to this standard and, we've pursued it, and it has worked out. Now, I can say for me, it's far scarier as the owner and as someone who, would probably give individuals, more opportunities to get on board. But I've been fortunate to have some good managers around me, that have, seen through, the initial difficult departures and been able to also source some great folks.
And so how have you defined that standard? So you say if people don't meet that standard, we have to be pretty ruthless because we have to protect the team, not the individual, right? So how have you defined that standard?
Paraphrase. So, first and foremost, there is a reliability factor, right? In terms of, how would we define that? Individuals have to be reliable, which means they need to understand that there is no call, no show, right? And that what you say is what you do. And if you don't do it, that needs to be communicated. We also would define it by way of, taking ownership, of the work that you're given. And that means being accountable for folks on your team as well as yourself. If you see something that isn't, meeting our standards, that you report it. It's a code of ethics that we reinforce over and over again. That, if somebody in the team is going to fail, then we all fail. And, if you get into specifics, it lives in safety. It lives in quality reports. It lives in number of complaints that we receive. It lives in, the inspections that we do, on a regular basis. And it lives in general, attendance at work, right? These are very basic things, but that's eventually, some of these marks circle around individuals, and then that individual is the person that needs to be addressed.
Sure.
Yeah.
So moving beyond that, sort of the evaluation framework, just the logistics, the complexity of managing a disparate network of people all over the place. Any realizations, any lessons learned, any tips, any tricks of how to manage a labor-intensive service business coming from a place where on the marketing, on the tech side, the scalability, the cost of distribution is so much lower than in the landscaping space.
And it's a huge challenge, right? So for us, first and foremost, technology is your friend. Helping folks keep themselves accountable. We have GPS tracking in all of our vehicles. We provide reports. We have standards in terms of how long, each crew has to be on every property. And those are provided back to the teams, into their inbox on a weekly basis so they know how they're tracking, right? And all of these roll up into a quarterly bonus program, that we offer. But there's probably 12 different metric points in that quarterly bonus program. And that's one of them, right? So how well do you manage your own time? That's a basic, trick, but generally you need to be present. So management really needs to be, involved. We start every day, with a meeting, and we end every day with a meeting.
Wow.
And so, and that's really critical. We have a classroom, in the front end of our warehouse, where we hold, a debrief at the end of the day and a briefing at the beginning of the day. And that's when everyone has the opportunity to voice, concerns, to go over what are the, priorities for the day. And then we circle back and we make sure that those were covered off on at the end.
So who's in that meeting? Is it you and your senior managers, or is it an all hands meeting?
This is our production supervisor. As well as our director of accounts, who also runs, the production supervisor reports into our director of accounts.
Got it.
Right. So those two folks, who are probably numbers 4 and 5 or 3 and 4 in the firm, they are running that meeting every day. And at times, we do have, obviously I know when I can meet with the entire company. Every morning and every afternoon, if I wanted to, I can. And that's a great opportunity for me. And then our president is there once a week. So there's a lot of presence, of management. So that means, that our folks in the field are constantly reminded that we're all in this together, number one, but number two, that there is an expectation that will be followed up on in terms of their standards.
Do you find, so I've seen a lot of landscaping companies, seen a lot of companies, period, but landscaping as well, and not every company starts the day with a meeting.
I don't know how that's possible.
Tell me why.
So, have you read the book 1 Minute Manager?
No.
I mean, it's the kind of book that you're given on your first day of work, and it's very basic. But at the end of the day, the philosophy is, and this is what I've learned, one of the biggest learnings has been how integrated into the day-to-day I need to be and how closely managed a firm like a landscaping firm needs to be, right? But at the end of the day, the philosophy is, address things in real time if possible, because the vast majority of issues can be handled immediately. It saves on just a backlog of issues that become problems that then become real problems with customers. Mm-hmm. So
what's covered in that meeting? Let's dive into that meeting. So what do you cover in that meeting? How long does it last?
The meeting it's a 15-minute meeting. Okay. It may stretch to 20, but we keep it short. It is every crew reports on their schedule for the day to make sure that what our customers know is being addressed is what actually is being addressed, right? Because it's not uncommon that we have to move a crew's schedule to address something that's more important, right? The other is any non-maintenance issues is addressed, and that is our irrigation and our install teams. Both go through their day. There is cross opportunities for cross communication where an irrigation repair or an install is happening at one of the maintenance crews' properties, so that there's real-time coordination of whatever efforts are going on, right? So if there's a building being painted and a major install happening, then the maintenance crew will have to maybe in that time decide to switch which zone they're working on in that day so that there's no complication on site. Yep. Little things like that will become huge issues if they're not addressed at the beginning of the day. At the beginning of the day, they take 30 seconds to address. Yep. And that's the general philosophy. We troubleshoot all of those. And then it is outliers, so anything that's out of the ordinary, right? So something came up overnight that needs to be addressed, any urgencies or emergencies if a client request came in, and then finally issues. So if there were complaints from the previous day, they're addressed in that moment, and that's it. And so that's the flow of the meeting. General announcements, if there are any, there typically are special meetings for those having to do with 401ks or HR or what have you. That's it. And crews are dispatched. They're sent on their way. And at the end of the day, there's a 5-minute recap. It's not very long, but they sit in a classroom style setting and we debrief them, and then they're on their way.
Yep. Makes sense. So I want to transition to sort of where you feel like you are now, with an eye towards the future and where you want to get to. So you're implementing this ERP system. You're a few years in. Maybe things didn't go as smooth or as fast as you expected for DHM, but you are also growing incredibly fast, especially incredibly fast for a labor-intensive service business. Rough, if you care to share, growth rates that you guys experience at DHM on an annual basis?
DHM's been growing on average at 45%.
Yeah, so that's nuts for a labor-intensive service business. So I guess first question would be, how do you think about managing that growth? Because a lot goes into that. You need to hire people, you need to finance it, it's equipment, heavy equipment, trucks, but also small equipment. You got to sell it. You got to sell it the right way. You got to set expectations. It's account management. It's admin staff. I mean, there's a lot of layers to be able to have to service that customer expectation that you set so high.
Absolutely. And, my initial response is I bought an existing firm, but if you looked at our last 3 years, we look like a startup because of that hockey stick, because of the amount of investment up front, et cetera.
I mean, those are like tech type growth rates.
And absolutely. So it shows that the intuition was spot on when it came to probably the most important things. I'd much rather have this problem than, we were unable to control costs or what have you. So I would say in terms of growth, so that is to say we're learning as we go, to answer that question, to be quite honest. But I will say we have an ebb and flow that I would say is a large growth spurt year, and then a relatively flat year. And for us, relatively low growth is 20%. So if you consider our size, which is still not very large, we can absorb growth because it's not, growing at 40% when you're a $10 million, gross revenue, annual company is different than when you're under $5 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but nevertheless, because you request more from the market every time you grow,
Sure.
You need to find that staff, you need to find the resources. But nevertheless, we are in a pattern of a big growth year and then a lower growth year. I can't call it flat because we haven't experienced one of those.
Yeah, still high growth.
So we do digest. So 2019, 2019, I would anticipate we are digesting much of 2018, and we spent much of 2018 digesting what we started the year with. So I think back half of 19, we'll probably see another series of steps up. But, it really comes down to very, very, very careful planning. We tend to know exactly where our staffing resources are coming from before we take on a big customer. A lot of times we've been fortunate enough to retain whoever was previously working because they were probably good workers, but perhaps not under the ideal management structure. Mm-hmm. In terms of we grow, we rely heavily on financing partners in order to absorb the required capital expenditures in a capital intensive industry. So, we've worked very hard over the last several years to put those in place, and we keep them aware of growth 6 months out. We really make it a point. Mm-hmm. And we also try to grow in a very targeted way. We aren't spraying the market yet. I think we're going to get to the point where we have to. We're not spraying the market with flyers or with promotions. We tend to target who we think is a high potential growth opportunity, and that's who we go after. And we've had a pretty successful experience, successful time doing that. And as such, we've been able to plan accordingly.
Sure. So I'm interested because you think very similar to the way we think about landscaping companies. So if you could only I'll give you 3 to 5. No, I'm going to give you 3 to 4. 3 to 4, if you want to call them stats, if you want to call them KPIs, whatever, about DHM to get a good feel for, are we on track or not? Which would they be?
So I would say, first and foremost, it's going to be our gross margin.
As a company, by division?
It would be as a company.
Okay.
By division, we obviously have 2 main divisions, and then we have probably 10 specific services, and they all have their own margins. But we'll dive in if we're not. We dive in no matter what. But every week we have a scorecard meeting. We have a transparent accounting philosophy at DHM. So we reveal our financial statements on a weekly basis with top management, and we review if everyone's on track. And every week they need to set a goal. It's a zero budget model, zero cost budgeting model that we implement. So I would say that margin in particular, because we beef up our COGS so much, that gross margin matters a lot to us. Mm-hmm. Everything else is pretty fixed. So that's really an essential number. Second, it would be, if we are on track, how far out we are booked with foreseeable work. We only have to really worry about 15% of our business being non-contracted, mm-hmm. But still, that's a very important metric for us. So how much uncertainty have we built into the pipeline? And that alleviates a tremendous amount of workload, and it allows us to focus on, the clients that we want to pick up. So I would say that's a sales number. One is a margin number. And then finally, it's going to be quality. How many complaints? So we have a complaint metric, and then we have an average grading system. So just like A, B, C, D, and F, that's what we have for our properties, and they all roll up to an average. So if those dip below a B, so we have B minus, so we have plus minus. Mm-hmm. Then there's a real cause for concern, and obviously we want everything. We have a high standard, but we want everything to be in the upper 80 percentile and the 90s ideally.
Sure.
So how many complaints we've and those would be reflected in our quarterly customer survey and net promoter score.
Sure.
So those are the three.
Yeah, good answer. So let's flash forward. You guys are growing so fast. So normally I say 5 years, but you guys are growing so fast. That's too long. So I'm going to go 3 years. What would you consider success to look like for DHM? It doesn't have to be financial, but sort of if you sort of fast forward 3 years and then look back, what would you be looking for to say, yeah, we executed well, we did what we wanted, or did what I wanted to do, or the team accomplished what we wanted to accomplish?
In 5 years, DHM will be be servicing an average HOA or commercial account that is twice the size of what our average is today. That's number one. And we don't service incredibly small, and we're not interested in servicing all incredibly large. We really like the idea of having a lot of parachutes to pull if we fall out of a plane. But that is...
So then why do you want revenue per customer to increase so much?
Because it reflects on the quality of the customer and the extent to which customers understand fundamentally the requirements of the property. It reflects the requirements of the property and the requirements of the property manager.
And do you worry at all that by mathematically, as you increase revenue per customer, your customer concentration also goes up? Does that worry you at all?
I think it did. But what we've been seeing is a healthy, gradual increase in revenue per customer year over year. And we are also seeing happy customers that have very predictable spend cycles, budgets, and a requirement to invest in landscape. And it's harder for them to say no to certain what we believe to be required services. Mm-hmm. Whereas your smaller customers are on a tighter, although there's more concentration or less concentration rather. It's not the case. DHM also has we're plus 25% maintenance only in our revenue. That would be growing about 5% from where we are now, just maintenance, not including any ancillary service that are contractual. And I would say that DHM has formed our culture. We call it the Environments for Life culture. And you can learn about it on our website, what that means. But that has really become something that is a part of us to the point where we're growing our own talent. We're less reliant on the market, even though that'll never go away, but we have a process in place, and that there's a tremendous demand to work at our company. And I would like to see DHM's non-maintenance work booked out a minimum of 3 months on average, preferably 6, but 6 may not be. I think we'd have to be significantly larger and have a much bigger dedication to that. But
sure. How about you personally? So that's the goal for DHM. When we started this podcast, you mentioned that what got you into this was entrepreneurship through acquisition, and we've had a lot of conversations historically about your aspirations beyond landscaping, just in the entrepreneurship through acquisition space. So anything personally, if you're talking about a 5-year horizon that you have out there, goals?
I feel like I've learned so much through this experience that I am very committed to the idea of doing it again better. Does that mean that DHM stays? My view would be it does. DHM has been stabilized. It has the ability to perpetuate. And I have the opportunity to take all of the learnings from DHM and to apply it to the next acquisition. Yep. And whether that is in the same space, which we've looked at a lot, and oftentimes we arrive at the conclusion that it's at our growth rate, it's much less costly to just keep growing than it is to take on that invested capital.
I've been telling you that for 18 months now?
Yeah.
And when 20% is your low growth, I've been adamant telling you that you're not going to find the acquisition that fits all the right boxes for you.
And that has definitely played out.
Yep.
And so, Palmer, I will say I've learned from and I don't know how patient you are, but from the perceived patience that you put out there, because it has allowed me to allow things to play out. And time and again, that's our conclusion.
I think, and I've told you this, so that's why I'm comfortable saying it on air here, that you discount the magnitude of what you're doing at DHM. I mean, I see in my seat talking with business owners who are contemplating selling, I see a wider share of those, the fragmented marketplace that is landscaping companies, and the way you approach it, the way you think about it, the way you've handled it, and the growth rates you experience, frankly, for large or small companies, is incredible. And unique. And so I shudder to think about what happens when you get on Aspire and you're able to open up the bag of tricks a little bit more and realize more of that, sort of that wish list of both front end and back end services to leverage technology better to enhance your mission.
Yeah, that's part of the 1-year plan. I mean, we really, that is a huge priority, and it always has been. And thank you for bringing it up, because it is definitely something that is missing to that extent. And priority number 1 would be to find a way to get that implemented and reap the rewards of it.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely not the be all end all. I mean, it is a tool, but my point of bringing it up is put a slightly more capable tool in your hands, in your team's hands, and if 45% was the upper bound, I think that becomes a much higher number if you guys have the ambition to go take it out.
Well, we definitely don't lack ambition. So
I hear you. So I want to wrap up the podcast with a couple questions I ask everyone. The first one I think will be pretty interesting given what we've talked about here. And it's imagine you have 4 months of time to allocate to DHM, but with none of the day-to-day. So you didn't have to attend the meetings, the morning meetings, the afternoon meetings, no issues, no call outs, no call, no shows, nothing. Pause button in life. And you have to allocate your 4 months full time to something DHM or a couple things DHM related. How are you allocating that time?
That's a great question. It really does kind of clear the board, right?
Yep.
I think that I would go back to my original vision for DHM, and I would spend part of that time plotting out that course to ensure that we really do ultimately accomplish that, because there are endless ways for us to compete in a way that's sustainable. We've been winning in a highly competitive marketplace for a reason, and it hasn't been through acquisition. It's been through having ultimately a better experience. So I would spend time thinking about that and plotting out what the next 5 years look like. With that, I would spend time visiting with, and I don't know if this is part of the day-to-day, but I would want to spend more time visiting with customers. I do spend a lot of time with them, but really understanding where they are, putting my finger on the pulse, and using that to inform, how I'm steering the ship at DHM. And then finally, I think that I would really want to educate myself on what's out there. We tend to put blinders on, and whether it's in the industry or outside of the industry, what am I not seeing when it comes to the next big trend, opportunity, threat, and use that time to just become more prepared to navigate the waters.
Awesome. So last question here, because the session around us is unloading here, and so we're about to have a bunch of people around us.
Yeah.
What haven't I asked that I should have?
Well, it's been a thorough interview. Let me think here. I think one thing we didn't talk about is what do we attribute to the sales specifically?
Okay.
And, one thing that I will say is, I have a marketing background, and maybe this is influencing this, but I think that there is something to be said about building a brand in this space. It's something that companies don't tend to do. You could argue that brands are organic and they just form over time, but DHM is a brand that has a platform behind it that really drives the company. And that was a process that required a lot of work. I mean, we had focus groups, and we went through a process, and I really led it. It wasn't a huge team, but I guess that's something that shouldn't be undervalued. And it should always be understood. with companies? What is their identity? How does that manifest itself? And to what extent is that a part of your day to day, or is it just a logo and a name?
Yeah. I mean, one of the sessions I just came out of before we hopped on this podcast was talking about, look, if your mindset in the landscaping space is if you're selling time, and time is, while it's a scarce resource, it is a commodity, then you're in the wrong frame of reference, right? You're not going to win sales. Like, it's a race to the bottom. And so I think while it is a fragmented industry, and I think too often the perception is fairly negative of landscapers, and so I think that can lead to a feeling that, well, there's no ability to build a brand in this space. There's no ability to stand out from the rest. I firmly believe that DHM is an example to the contrary about how wrong that really is, and really look forward to seeing what you guys do in this marketplace going forward. So,
great.
Paul, thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Thanks
really
for having me. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Big Time Small Business Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review and share the show with a friend. To access show notes and subscribe to our distribution list, be sure to visit us at chenmarkcapital.com/podcast. That's Chenmark, CHENMARK, capital.com/podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at ChenHoldCo, CHEN Holdco. Last but not least, we'd love to hear from you, so please drop us a line at podcast@chenmarkcapital.com. Thanks a lot.